The wind that night tasted like copper and regret. Alara Voss stood at the window of the bedroom that had once been hers, watching the main street of Ashford Bend empty itself of life as the sun bled out behind the mountains. Her fingers pressed against the glass, leaving ghost prints that faded almost as quickly as they appeared. Outside, the town prepared for a wedding, her wedding, to a man she'd rather see buried than bedded. She was 26 years old and already a widow. That should have been enough tragedy for one lifetime. It wasn't. "You're being unreasonable, Ilara." The voice came from behind her, smooth as snake oil and twice as poisonous. She didn't turn around, didn't give Marcus Voss the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "Unreasonable," she repeated, the word bitter in her mouth. "That's a generous interpretation of a woman who doesn't want to marry her dead husband's brother. It's not about what you want. It's about what's proper, what's right." Marcus moved closer. She could smell the tobacco on him, the whiskey he'd been drinking since noon. "Thomas built this ranch, my brother, and now that he's gone, it falls to me to maintain the family legacy. That includes you." Ilara's jaw tightened. "I'm not property. Legally, you're not much more than that." His reflection appeared in the window beside hers, distorted by the imperfect glass. "You know how this works. Thomas died without children. The ranch goes to me. Everything goes to me. Unless I marry you." She turned to face him now, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that had taken her 3 months to cultivate. 3 months since Thomas died in a riding accident that Marcus had been conveniently nearby to witness. 3 months of veiled threats and social pressure and the slow, suffocating realization that the law would not protect her, the town would not defend her, and her choices had narrowed to two: submit or lose everything. Marcus smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not a cruel man, Ilara. I'm offering you security, respectability, a future. You're offering me a prison with better furniture." His smile faded. "Watch your tongue. You're not in a position to what? Refuse?" She laughed, sharp and humorless. "I'm well aware of my position, Marcus. You've made it abundantly clear." They stood there in the failing light, two people bound by law and circumstance and mutual loathing. Outside, someone hammered the final nails into the wedding arch that would be erected in front of the church. The sound echoed like gunshots. "Tomorrow," Marcus said quietly, "you'll stand beside me in front of this whole town and speak your vows. You'll smile, you'll be gracious, and then we'll come back here, to this house, and begin our lives together as husband and wife. This is happening, Ilara. You can make it easy or you can make it hard, but it is happening." Moshtu. He left then, his boots heavy on the wooden floors Thomas had installed 2 summers ago when they'd still believed they had a future, when they'd still been happy. Ilara waited until she heard the front door close before she let herself sink onto the edge of the bed. Her hands were shaking. They'd been shaking for weeks now, a constant tremor she couldn't quite suppress. Fear had a physical weight, she'd discovered. It lived in her chest, in her stomach, and the base of her spine, a presence as real as another person. She'd tried everything. She'd written to Thomas's cousins in Denver. They'd never responded. She'd consulted with the town lawyer, a pinch-faced man named Harlow, who'd explained with barely concealed impatience that her legal options were essentially non-existent. A woman alone, with no children, no family, no independent means. The ranch had been in the Voss name long before her marriage. She had no claim to it, not really, not legally. "You should be grateful Marcus is willing to marry you," Harlow had said, his spectacles catching the lamplight in his cramped office. "Most men wouldn't take on another man's widow. It's unseemly." Unseemly. As if she were spoiled goods, as if Thomas's death had somehow tainted her. She'd left that office with the last of her hope crumbling to dust. The knock on her door came just after midnight. Ilara had been packing, not clothes, just papers. The deed to a small plot of land her father had left her in Colorado, land that Marcus didn't know about because she'd never told Thomas. A few letters. A photograph of her parents, dead now 10 years. Small things that could fit in a saddlebag and represented the only pieces of her life that Marcus couldn't claim ownership over. The knock was soft but insistent. 3 taps, a pause. 3 more taps. She froze, her hand on the photograph. Marcus had men watching the house. She'd seen them, lounging against fence posts, smoking cigarettes, their eyes following her whenever she stepped outside. If this was one of them, Mrs. Voss. The voice was male, unfamiliar, pitched low to carry through the door, but not beyond it. I got a message for you, from a friend. She had no friends, not anymore. The town had made its allegiances clear. Slowly she crossed to the door. Who are you? Name's Rhett Calder. I'm nobody important, but I'm somebody who can help you, if you're willing to listen for 2 minutes. Alara's pulse hammered in her throat. This could be a trap. Marcus testing her loyalty, her submission, or it could be... She opened the door. The man on the other side was lean and weathered, maybe 35, with the kind of face that had seen too much sun and not enough comfort. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat pulled low, and his eyes moved constantly, scanning the hallway behind her, the windows, the shadows. A drifter's caution. You have 1 minute, Alara said. Fair enough? He didn't ask to come in, didn't move from the threshold. I was in the saloon tonight, heard some men talking about tomorrow's wedding, heard one of them say it was a shame about poor Alara Voss, trapped like a rabbit with no way out. Heard another say Marcus Voss was the kind of man who didn't let go of what was his, even if he had to take it by force. Alara's fingers tightened on the doorframe. Are you trying to frighten me? Because I'm trying to offer you an alternative. His eyes met hers, and there was something steady in them, something that felt almost like kindness. You don't know me. Got no reason to trust me. But I've been where you are, backed into a corner with bad choices on every side. And sometimes the only way out is the way nobody's watching. I don't understand. I think you do. He glanced over his shoulder, quick, then back to her. I got 2 horses saddled and waiting at the north edge of town. Supplies for 2 weeks, maybe more if we're careful. A route through the back country that'll put 50 miles between you and this place by sunrise. The world seemed to tilt. You're suggesting I run. I'm suggesting you leave. There's a difference. He shifted his weight, and she saw the gun at his hip, worn but well-maintained. Look, I don't expect you to decide right now, but here's the truth. Come dawn, you'll either be standing in that church, or you'll be riding north with a stranger. One of those futures is yours to choose. The other is being chosen for you. That's all I'm saying. Why? The question burst out of her, too loud in the quiet hallway. She lowered her voice. Why would you help me? You don't know me. I can't pay you. I have nothing. Something flickered across his face. An old pain, maybe, or a memory he didn't want to examine too closely. Let's just say I got my reasons, and they're mine, not yours to worry about. He stepped back from the door, tipping his hat. North edge of town, 2 horses. I'll wait until an hour before dawn. After that, I'm gone, and the offer goes with me. He paused. For what it's worth, Mrs. Voss, you strike me as somebody who spent too long doing what other people expect. Maybe it's time you disappointed them. Then he was gone, disappearing down the hallway like smoke, his footsteps silent on the stairs. Alara closed the door and leaned against it, her heart a wild thing in her chest. 2 horses, a route north, freedom, or a trap, or salvation. She didn't sleep. How could she? Instead, she sat in the darkness, turning over every angle, every possibility. Rhett Calder, if that was even his real name, could be working for Marcus. This could be an elaborate test, a way to prove her disloyalty before the wedding, give Marcus legal grounds to claim she'd abandoned the marriage and forfeit any remaining claims she might have. Or he could be exactly what he appeared to be, a stranger with a conscience and a willingness to risk himself for someone else's escape. The problem was, she had no way to know which was true until she made a choice. At 3 a.m, she stood and began to pack properly. Not papers this time. Practical things. A change of clothes, sturdy boots, the small revolver Thomas had taught her to shoot with back when they used to ride out to the far pastures together. A canteen. Her wedding ring. She hesitated over that, then slipped it off her finger and left it on the dresser. Let Marcus interpret that however he wanted. She moved through the house like a ghost, collecting supplies from the kitchen, filling a knapsack with hardtack and dried meat. The floorboards creaked under her weight, loud as accusations. Once she heard movement from Marcus's room on the first floor and froze, barely breathing, until silence settled again. By 4:30, she was ready. By 4:45, she was terrified. By 5 o'clock, she was climbing out her bedroom window. The drop to the ground was further than she'd anticipated. She landed hard, stumbling, her knapsack thudding against her spine. For a horrible moment, she thought she'd twisted her ankle, but the pain faded to a dull ache and she could still walk. She pressed herself against the side of the house, listening. No shouts, no alarm, just the pre-dawn silence and the distant sound of someone's rooster announcing the coming day. She ran. The north edge of town was a 15-minute walk in daylight. In the dark, terrified and carrying a pack, it felt like an hour. Every shadow was a threat, every sound a pursuer. She kept to the alleys, avoiding the main street, her breath loud in her ears. Once, she had to duck behind a water trough as two men passed by, their voices rough with alcohol and fatigue. They didn't see her. Luck, maybe, or the universe offering her one small mercy. The horses were exactly where Rhett had said they'd be, tied to a skeletal cottonwood at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open scrubland. Two dark shapes in the darkness, and beside them, barely visible, a man. Rhett turned as she approached, and even in the dimness she could see his surprise. "Didn't think you'd come." "I didn't think I would either." Her voice shook. She hated that it shook. He moved to one of the horses, checking the saddle, his movements efficient and practiced. "You know how to ride?" "I'm a rancher's widow. Of course I know how to ride." "Right, stupid question." He glanced at her, and there was something almost like approval in his eyes. "You bring anything that'll slow us down? Trunks, hat boxes, that kind of thing?" "Just this." She held up her knapsack. "Good. We're traveling light and fast. Once we clear town, we've got maybe a 3-hour head start before someone realizes you're gone. After that, they'll come looking. Marcus Voss doesn't strike me as the forgiving type." Alora swung herself into the saddle, her hands finding the reins with muscle memory. The horse shifted beneath her, responsive and alert. Good stock. Rhett hadn't skimped. "He'll send men," she said quietly. "Lots of them. He's got money and pride, and I just damaged both." "I figured." Rhett mounted his own horse, settling into the saddle like he'd been born there. "That's why we're not taking the main road. We're going up." "Up?" He pointed northeast, where the mountains rose like broken teeth against the lightening sky. "Into the high country. Harder to track, harder to follow. Harder on us too, but we don't have a choice." "Now you're getting it." He turned his horse north. "Stay close. Don't talk unless you have to. And Mrs. Voss?" "Yes?" "Welcome to the worst decision of your life." They rode. The first hour passed in a blur of adrenaline and fear. Alara kept expecting to hear shouts behind them, gunshots, the thunder of pursuing horses. But there was only the sound of their own mounts, the creak of leather, the occasional scatter of stones beneath hooves. The land around Ashford Bend was flat and unforgiving, offering no cover, and as the sky began to pale in the east, she felt horribly exposed, like a target. But Rhett seemed to know what he was doing. He led them not north but northeast, angling toward rougher country, following a route that avoided the main trails. Once, he reined in his horse and sat motionless for several minutes, just listening. Alara waited, her heart in her throat, until he nodded, and they continued. By the time the sun broke over the horizon, they'd put 10 miles between themselves and the town. Maybe more. Alara's thighs ached from the unfamiliar saddle, her shoulders tight with tension, but she didn't complain. Complaining was a luxury she couldn't afford. Rhett finally called a halt in a narrow draw between two rocky hills, a place where stunted junipers offered minimal shade and a trickle of water ran between stones. He dismounted and began checking the horses, his hands moving with practiced care. Alara slid from her saddle and immediately regretted it. Her legs nearly buckled. She caught herself against her horse's flank, breathing hard. "You all right?" Rhett didn't look up from his work. "Fine." "You're a terrible liar." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "It's been a long night. It's going to be a longer day." He straightened, meeting her eyes. "We rest here for 20 minutes. Water the horses, eat something if you can stomach it. Then we keep moving. We need to hit the foothills by nightfall." Alara nodded, too tired to argue. She found her canteen and drank, the water warm and metallic. The sun was climbing now, turning the sky from gray to pale blue, and with the light came a new fear: visibility. Anyone looking for them would see their dust, their tracks. They were leaving a trail a child could follow. "You're thinking they'll catch us?" She glanced at Rhett. He was chewing on a piece of jerky, his eyes on the horizon. "Aren't you?" "I'm thinking they'll try." He offered her a piece of the jerky. But trying and succeeding are different things. Marcus might have money and men, but we've got motivation and a head start. That counts for something. Does it? She took the jerky even though she wasn't hungry. "You don't know him. He's persistent, vindictive. He won't let this go." "Then we make sure he can't catch us." Rhett's voice was calm, matter of fact. "Look, Mrs. Voss, Ilara, if we're fleeing into the wilderness together, you can call me Ilara." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Ilara, you need to understand something. The second you climbed on that horse, you stopped being a victim. You made a choice. Own it, because from here on out, doubt will kill you faster than any bullet." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she was terrified, that she had no idea if she'd made the right choice, that part of her still wanted to turn back and face whatever consequences awaited her in Ashford Bend. But something in his eyes stopped her. He knew. He'd been here before, in some form or another, running from something, towards something, and he'd survived. "How long?" she asked instead. "How long what?" "How long until we're safe?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. Safe is relative. California's about 300 miles west. If we can make it there, get you established under a new name, maybe find work, then you'll be safe enough. But between here and there? He shook his head. There's no safe. There's just moving forward. 300 miles. Ilara tried to imagine it and couldn't. She'd never been more than 30 miles from Ashford Bend in her entire life. "Why California?" she asked. "Because it's far. Because it's big enough to get lost in. Because I got a friend there who owes me a favor." He glanced at the sun, gauging time. "We should move." They rode throughout the day, stopping only when the horses needed rest. The landscape changed gradually around them, the flat scrubland giving way to rolling hills, then steeper terrain. The temperature climbed, turning the air thick and oppressive. Ilara's dress clung to her skin, sweat running down her spine. She'd dressed for a wedding, not a flight across the desert. Rhett noticed. "We'll get you proper trail clothes at the next town, assuming there is a next town." "What if there isn't?" "Then you'll learn to ride in a dress." By mid-afternoon, the first real panic set in. It started as a tightness in Ilara's chest, a sensation of the world pressing in on her from all sides. They were in rough country now, following game trails through stands of scrub oak and over rocky outcroppings. Her horse stumbled twice, nearly throwing her, her hands cramped on the reins. And somewhere behind them, how far? 10 miles? 20? Marcus's men would be saddling up, organizing a search. They'd find her room empty, the window open. They'd find her wedding ring on the dresser like a final insult. They'd come after her with everything they had. "I can't do this." The words came out strangled. "I can't. I shouldn't have." Rhett reined in immediately, turning to look at her. "Hey, look at me." She couldn't. She was going to be sick. She was going to fall off this horse and... "Ilara, look at me." His voice cut through the panic like a blade. She looked. "You're scared," he said. "That's fine. Be scared, but keep riding. They're going to find us." "Maybe. Probably. But not today. Not if we keep moving." "You don't understand. Marcus will..." "I don't need to understand Marcus." His eyes were steady, unflinching. "I understand you, and you're stronger than you think. You climbed out a window in the dark. You left everything you knew for a chance at something better. That takes steel, Ilara. So find that steel now and use it." She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel that strength he seemed so certain she possessed, but all she felt was hollow and terrified, and achingly alone. Still, she didn't turn back. They rode on. Sunset found them in the foothills, camped in a narrow canyon where a seasonal creek cut through red stone. Rhett built a small, nearly smokeless fire from dry wood, and they ate a cold supper of hardtack and dried fruit. The horses were picketed nearby, their heads low with exhaustion. Alara's entire body ached. She'd ridden before, plenty of times, but never like this. Never with such desperate purpose. "How far did we come today?" she asked, her voice rough with fatigue. 30 miles, give or take." Rhett poked at the fire with a stick. "Not enough." "Not enough?" "I'd hoped for 40, but the terrain slowed us down." He glanced at her. "You did good, though. Better than I expected." It wasn't much of a compliment, but it warmed her nonetheless. "What happens tomorrow?" "We keep climbing, get into the high country where horses are harder to track. Then we angle west, toward the Sierra Passes." He paused. "It won't be easy." "I didn't think it would be." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to coals. The night around them was alive with sound. Crickets, a distant owl, the rustle of small animals in the brush. Overhead, stars emerged in a sky so clear it hurt to look at. "Can I ask you something?" Alara said finally. "Depends on the question. Why did you help me?" Rhett was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "I had a sister once, younger than me. Sweet girl, too trusting. She married a man who seemed decent enough at first. By the time we realized what he really was, it was too late. She was trapped, same as you. I tried to help her leave. Even had horses ready, same as tonight." "What happened?" His jaw tightened. "She didn't come. Too scared or too beaten down or... I don't know. She stayed, and he killed her 6 months later. Made it look like an accident, but I knew. Everyone knew. But he had money and connections, and she was just a woman with no family willing to fight for her." Alara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just stay alive." He met her eyes across the fire. "That's all I ask. Stay alive and make this mean something." She nodded, not trusting her voice. They took turns sleeping, one of them always on watch. Alara took the first shift, sitting with her back against a boulder, Rhett's rifle across her lap. The weight of it was foreign and frightening and somehow comforting. She'd never been responsible for her own safety before. There had always been someone else, her father, then Thomas, then the awful inevitability of Marcus. Now there was just her and a stranger and the wild country between them and whatever came next. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. She didn't sleep when her shift ended, just lay on the hard ground, wrapped in a thin blanket, staring at the stars and wondering if Marcus was looking at the same sky, wondering if he was already hunting her, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But she didn't turn back. The second day was worse. They broke camp before dawn and rode hard, pushing the horses up steep trails that switch back through pine forest and across exposed slopes of shale. The air grew thinner, colder. Alara's lungs burned with the effort of breathing. Her horse slipped twice on loose rock, and the second time she nearly went over its head. Only her grip on the saddle horn saved her. Rhett led them higher, always higher, following paths that looked like they'd been made by mountain goats rather than humans. Once, he stopped and pointed down into the valley they'd climbed out of. Alara looked and saw it. A thin line of dust, miles below but unmistakable. Riders, coming north. "How many?" she asked, her voice tight. 4, maybe 5. Could be trackers. Could be hunters. Could be nothing to do with us. But you don't think so? No, I don't think so. They pushed on, abandoning the trail entirely and cutting cross-country through stands of aspen and over bare granite. The horses were struggling now, their sides heaving, foam flecking their mouths. Alara wanted to stop, wanted to rest, but Rhett's face was grim and he didn't slow. By afternoon, the weather turned. Clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and dark, and the temperature plummeted. Alara's breath misted in the air. She'd left Ashford Bend in a light cotton dress. Now she was climbing into the mountains in clothes meant for a summer wedding. She started to shiver and couldn't stop. Rhett noticed. He pulled his horse alongside hers and shrugged out of his coat, handing it over. "Put this on." "You'll freeze." "I've been colder. Take it." She took it, wrapping herself in wool that smelled like wood smoke and leather and sweat. It was too big, the sleeves hanging past her hands, but it was warm. Blessedly warm. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "Save your thanks for when we're clear of this." The first raindrops fell an hour later. Within minutes, it was a downpour. They took shelter under an overhang of rock, huddled together with the horses, watching water sheet down in silver curtains. Lightning cracked across the sky, close enough that Alara could taste the ozone. The horses shifted nervously, their eyes rolling white. "This is bad," Rhett said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I noticed." "No, I mean, rain washes out tracks. That's good for us. But it also makes the trails dangerous. Mudslides, flash floods." He wiped water from his face. "We need to find real shelter. A cave, an abandoned cabin, something. Is there anything like that up here?" "I'm hoping, because if there isn't, we're going to have a bad night." They found the cabin by accident, stumbling across it just as the light began to fail. It was more of a shack, really, a prospector's shelter long abandoned, with a sagging roof and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. But it was standing, and it had 4 walls, and that was enough. Rhett checked it for snakes and other occupants, while Alara led the horses to a lean-to structure that might once have been a stable. It was in marginally better condition than the cabin itself. She unsaddled the animals, her fingers numb and clumsy, and rubbed them down with handfuls of old straw she found in a corner. They deserved better: grain, warm water, proper care. But this would have to do. Inside the cabin, Rhett had managed to coax a fire to life in the old stone hearth. Smoke curled up toward a chimney that only partially functioned, but most of it vented properly and the heat was immediate and wonderful. Alara stumbled toward it, holding her hands out to the flames. "We can't stay long," Rhett warned. "Smoke's visible. If those riders are close..." "I know, just give me 5 minutes, please." He nodded, stepping back. 5 minutes. They were both soaked through, water pooling on the warped floorboards. Alara's dress clung to her like a second skin, heavy and uncomfortable. She wanted nothing more than to strip it off, to wrap herself in a dry blanket and sleep for a week. But there were no dry blankets. There was only the fire and the dubious shelter of rotting wood and Rhett Calder, the stranger who had risked everything to help her and who she still didn't entirely trust. "Why did you really help me?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Don't tell me it's because of your sister. That's part of it, maybe, but there's something else. There has to be." Rhett crouched by the fire, feeding it small sticks. "You don't believe in simple altruism?" "I don't believe in anything simple anymore." He laughed, bitter and brief. "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment, watching the flames. "You want the truth? I was in Ashford Bend because I'm wanted in 3 other territories. Nothing major. A card game that went wrong, some accusations I didn't stick around to argue with. I needed to lay low for a while, make some money, move on, and then I saw you." "Saw me?" "In the general store. You were buying supplies, and Marcus was with you. I watched him grab your arm when you reached for something he didn't approve of. Watched you flinch. Watched everyone else in that store pretend they didn't see anything." He looked up at her. "And I thought, here's someone who needs a way out even more than I do." Alara didn't know what to say to that. "So this is... what? Guilt? Penance? Call it whatever you want. I saw a woman in trouble and I had the means to help, so I did." He stood, brushing ash from his hands. "You can trust me or not, Alara. That's your choice. But I'm not abandoning you, not until you're safe. And then I disappear. That was always the plan." The honesty of it stung more than she expected. She wanted to argue, to demand promises he had no reason to keep. But he was right. He didn't owe her anything beyond what he'd already given. "We should try to rest," she said instead, "even if it's just for a few hours." "You rest. I'll keep watch." "Rhett, I mean it. You're exhausted. I can see it." His voice softened. "Sleep, Alara. I'll wake you if anything changes." She wanted to refuse, wanted to insist on sharing the watch, on pulling her weight, but exhaustion pulled at her like a physical force, dragging her down. She found the driest corner of the cabin, wrapped Rhett's coat tighter around herself, and closed her eyes. Sleep claimed her in seconds. She woke to gunfire. The first shot punched through the cabin's rotted door, splintering wood and sending fragments flying. Alara jerked awake, disoriented, her heart already hammering before her mind caught up with what was happening. The second shot followed immediately, higher, smashing through the window frame where glass had long since disappeared. Rhett was already moving, grabbing her arm and hauling her toward the back wall. "Stay low!" "How many?" Her voice came out strangled. "Too many." He shoved the rifle into her hands. "You know how to use this?" Yes, but then use it if you have to. I'm going for the horses." "Wait, you can't." But he was already gone, slipping through a gap in the back wall that she hadn't noticed in the darkness. Outside, voices shouted commands. At least 3 different men, maybe more. The rain had stopped sometime while she slept, and now the pre-dawn air carried sound with brutal clarity. "Come out, Mrs. Voss." The voice was unfamiliar, rough with authority and maybe whiskey. "Nobody needs to get hurt here." Alara pressed herself against the wall, the rifle cold and heavy in her shaking hands. Through the broken window, she could see movement, shadows separating from shadows, men positioning themselves around the cabin. They'd found the horses in the lean-to. They knew exactly where their targets were. Another shot, this one from a different angle, punching through the back wall inches from where she crouched. She scrambled sideways, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "We can do this easy or hard, ma'am. Mr. Voss just wants you home safe, that's all." Liar. Marcus didn't want her safe. He wanted her broken and compliant and stripped of any illusions that she had choices. She'd seen what he did to things that defied him: horses, dogs, ranch hands who questioned his authority. She'd be just another possession that needed correction. The cabin's front door exploded inward, kicked off its remaining hinge. A man filled the doorway, backlit by the growing dawn, rifle raised. Alara didn't think. She pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, knocking her backward. The shot went wide, splintering the door frame above the man's head, but it was enough to make him dive for cover. She worked the rifle's action like Thomas had taught her, chambering another round, her hands moving on muscle memory while her mind screamed in terror. "She's armed!" the man shouted. "The widow's shooting!" More gunfire erupted, turning the cabin into a death trap. Bullets chewed through the thin walls, punching holes that let in streams of gray morning light. Alara crawled toward the hearth, trying to put stone between herself and the shooters, her dress catching on splinters and nails. The rifle scraped against the floor. Her entire body shook. Then Rhett was back, appearing through the rear gap like a ghost, leading both horses. "Now! Move now!" She didn't question it, just scrambled toward him, still clutching the rifle, and let him boost her onto her horse. The animal was wild-eyed and dancing, terrified by the gunfire, and it took everything she had to keep her seat. Rhett swung onto his own mount, and then they were moving, crashing through the gap in the back wall and into the scrub beyond. Shouts erupted behind them. More shots, closer now, the crack of rifles mixing with the thunder of hooves. Alara bent low over her horse's neck, feeling bullets pass overhead like angry wasps. The terrain was rocky and treacherous in the weak light, and her horse stumbled twice, nearly going down. She hauled on the reins, keeping the animal upright through sheer desperation. Rhett led them up, always up, into terrain so steep she didn't know how the horses managed it. Behind them, their pursuers struggled to follow. She risked a glance back and saw 3 riders, maybe 4, strung out along the slope below them. One was dismounting, raising a rifle for a careful shot. "Rhett!" she screamed. He saw it too. Yanked his horse sideways just as the rifle cracked, the bullet singing off a boulder where his head had been a second before. Then they were over a ridge and temporarily out of sight, buying precious seconds. "There!" Rhett pointed to a narrow cut between 2 rock faces. "Through there!" The gap was barely wide enough for the horses. Alara's legs scraped against stone, tearing her dress, probably tearing skin beneath it, though she couldn't feel pain through the adrenaline. The horses fought the tight space, but Rhett drove them forward with voice and heel until they emerged on the other side and stopped dead. The ground dropped away in front of them. Not a cliff, exactly, but close enough. A steep scree slope that ran 200 feet down to a boulder field, every surface loose and unstable. No trail, no path. Suicide on horseback. Behind them, the voices were getting closer. "We have to go back," Alara said. Find another way." "There is no other way." Rhett was already dismounting. "We go down. On foot." "That's insane." "So is getting shot." He grabbed the reins of both horses, his face grim. "I'm sorry." She understood a second before he did it. "No, wait!" He slapped both horses on the rump, hard, sending them scrambling away along the ridgeline. They'd find their way down eventually, or they wouldn't. Either way, they were no longer an option. "Can you climb?" Rhett asked. "Do I have a choice?" "No." The first pursuer appeared at the gap just as they started down. Alara heard him shout, heard the crack of his rifle, but they were already sliding, half falling down the scree slope in a cascade of loose rock. She lost her footing immediately, went down hard on her hip, and then she was tumbling, unable to stop herself. The rifle flew from her grip. The world became a chaos of gray stone and pain, and the horrible sound of rocks sliding beneath her. She fetched up against a boulder hard enough to knock the air from her lungs, lay there gasping, tasting blood, dimly aware that Rhett was somewhere nearby, also down. Above them, more gunfire, but the shooters weren't following, too dangerous, even for men being paid to hunt fugitives. "Alara," Rhett's voice, rough and strained. "You alive?" "I think so." She pushed herself upright, taking inventory, left wrist screaming, sprained or broken, she couldn't tell. Her hip was going to be one massive bruise, blood running from a gash on her forehead, getting in her eyes. But she could move. That was something. Rhett was in worse shape. His left arm hung at an odd angle and blood soaked through his shirt from somewhere. But he was standing, leaning against a boulder, his good hand on his pistol. "We need to move," he said. "They'll circle around, try to cut us off." "You're hurt." "I'm mobile, that's what matters." He pushed away from the boulder, swaying slightly. "Come on." They stumbled through the boulder field like drunks, every step in agony. Alara's wrist was definitely broken. She could feel the bones grinding when she tried to use her hand. The bleeding from her forehead wouldn't stop. Rhett kept having to pause to catch his breath, his face gone gray beneath the dirt and blood. The sun was fully up now, turning the landscape harsh and exposed. No cover, no shelter, just rocks and scrub, and the constant fear of another bullet finding them. "There," Rhett pointed with his good arm. "Trees. If we can make it to the trees—" He didn't finish the sentence, just started walking, and Alara followed because there was nothing else to do. They reached the tree line an hour later, though it felt like days. Neither of them could move faster than a pained shuffle. Behind them, their pursuers had disappeared, but that didn't mean they'd given up. It meant they were being smart, taking a safer route, probably getting ahead of their prey. Under the pines, Rhett finally stopped. He leaned against a tree trunk and slowly slid down until he was sitting, his injured arm cradled against his chest. The blood on his shirt had spread. Not arterial, he'd be dead already if it was, but steady and concerning. Alara dropped beside him, her broken wrist throbbing in time with her heartbeat. "Let me see." "It's fine." "It's not fine. You're bleeding everywhere." She reached for his shirt with her good hand, and he didn't stop her. Didn't have the strength to stop her, more like. The bullet had carved a furrow across his ribs, deep enough to be serious, but not immediately fatal. She used strips torn from her already ruined dress to bind it, working one-handed, her vision swimming from pain and exhaustion. Rhett didn't make a sound the entire time, but she felt him go rigid when she pulled the makeshift bandage tight. "Your turn," he said when she finished. "I'm fine." "You've got a broken wrist and you're bleeding from the head." "That's not fine." They bandaged each other in silence, two broken people trying to patch themselves enough to keep running. When they were done, Rhett pulled out his canteen, miraculously still intact, and they shared the water. It was warm and tasted like metal, and it was the best thing Alara had ever drunk. "We lost the horses," she said. "The supplies." "I know." "We're on foot in the mountains with no food, no shelter, and men hunting us." "I know that too." "So what do we do?" Rhett was quiet for a long moment, his eyes closed. When he opened them, they were clearer than they had any right to be. "We keep going. On foot if we have to. There's a settlement maybe 30 miles west of here. Silver Creek. Mining town. Mostly played out, but there'll be people. We can get supplies, maybe horses. Then we push for California. 30 miles. Alara looked down at her broken wrist, at the blood still seeping through the bandage on Rhett's ribs. "We'll never make it." "Then we'll die trying, but I didn't bring you this far to give up now." Something in his voice made her look at him, really look at him. He was pale and hurting and probably had a concussion from that fall, but there was steel in his eyes. The same steel he'd told her she possessed. Maybe they were both just stubborn enough to survive this. 30 miles, she repeated. 30 miles. You're insane. I've been called worse. He pushed himself upright, using the tree for support. We rest for 1 hour. Then we move. They didn't make 30 miles that day. They made 5, maybe 6, stumbling through pine forest and across alpine meadows, following game trails when they could find them and making their own when they couldn't. The sun climbed and fell, indifferent to their suffering. Alara's wrists swelled until she couldn't move her fingers. Rhett's breathing grew labored, each inhalation catching on what might be a cracked rib. They didn't talk. Talking required energy they didn't have. They just walked, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant dying. As twilight fell, they found a hollow beneath a fallen pine, a space just large enough for 2 people to squeeze into. Rhett checked it for animals, found it empty, and they crawled inside. No fire. Too risky. No food. They had none. Just the 2 of them in the gathering darkness, listening to the forest settle around them. We should take turns sleeping, Ilara whispered. Neither of us is sleeping tonight. Rhett shifted, trying to find a position that didn't make his ribs scream. Too cold, too exposed. We just rest and wait for dawn. He was right. The temperature was already dropping, and without blankets or a fire, actual sleep would be dangerous. Hypothermia could kill them as surely as bullets. They huddled together for warmth, propriety abandoned in favor of survival. Ilara could feel Rhett shivering against her, or maybe she was the one shivering and he was just solid in there. She'd never been this close to a man who wasn't Thomas. Part of her, the part still clinging to old rules and old morals, was scandalized. The rest of her was too tired and hurt to care. Tell me about your sister, she said into the darkness. Anything to stay awake, to keep the cold at bay. Rhett was quiet so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, her name was Sarah. She was 4 years younger than me. Used to follow me everywhere when we were kids, drove me crazy. But she was sweet. Too sweet for the world we lived in. What happened to her husband after? Nothing. That's the part that ate at me. He got away with it. Remarried a year later to another young woman with no family to protect her. Last I heard, he was still living in that same house, still playing the respectable rancher. You could have killed him? I thought about it. Spent months thinking about nothing else. His voice was flat, emotionless. But I would have hanged, and Sarah would still be dead. So I left instead. Started drifting. Figured if I couldn't save her, maybe I could save someone else. Ilara understood then. She wasn't just a widow in trouble. She was his second chance, his redemption. The weight of that should have bothered her, but instead it felt oddly comforting. She wasn't alone in this. They were both running from ghosts. Thank you, she said, for helping me, for not giving up. Thank me when we're safe. What if we don't get safe? He shifted slightly, and she felt his good arm tighten around her shoulders. Then at least you tried. That's more than most people can say. The night lasted forever. Every sound was a threat, branches breaking, animals moving through the underbrush, the wind that might be voices. Ilara dozed in fits and starts, jerking awake at intervals, convinced that Marcus's men had found them. But dawn came eventually, cold and gray, and they were still alive. Getting out of the hollow was agony. Every muscle had stiffened overnight. Rhett couldn't use his left arm at all, and Alara's wrist had swollen to twice its normal size, the skin mottled purple and yellow. They looked like casualties from a war, which wasn't far from the truth. How far? Ilara asked as they started walking again. To Silver Creek? 25 miles, give or take. Can we make it? We have to. The second day on foot was worse than the first. They had no food. The canteen was empty. They'd finished the last of the water at dawn. Dehydration joined the list of things trying to kill them. Ilara's lips cracked and bled. Her tongue felt thick in her mouth. She started seeing things at the edge of her vision, movements that weren't there, shadows that dissolved when she looked directly at them. Rhett wasn't doing any better. He kept stumbling, catching himself at the last second. The blood had seeped through his bandages again. He needed a doctor, proper care, rest, none of which were available. Around midday, they found a stream. Small, barely more than a trickle between rocks, but it was water, clean water. They fell on it like drowning victims finding air, drinking until their stomachs cramped. Alara splashed her face, washing away dried blood and dirt, and caught sight of her reflection in a still pool. She didn't recognize the woman looking back at her. Gaunt face, sunken eyes, hair matted with blood and debris. 3 days ago, she'd been standing in her bedroom, contemplating a wedding dress. Now she looked like something that had crawled out of a grave. "We should keep moving," Rhett said. He'd filled the canteen, was already standing. "Make miles while we can." "Rhett." She looked up at him. "Are we going to make it?" He met her eyes, and for the first time since they'd fled Ashford Bend, she saw doubt there. Just for a second. Then it was gone, buried beneath determination. "Yes." "You don't sound certain." "I'm certain enough for both of us. Now get up. We're not dying in these mountains." They walked. Afternoon bled into evening. The terrain grew rougher, forcing them to detour around obstacles that cost them time and energy they couldn't afford. Once they heard voices in the distance and had to hide, pressing themselves into a rocky crevice while 2 men passed within 100 yards. Hunters or trackers or just prospectors. They couldn't tell and didn't wait to find out. By the time darkness forced them to stop, Alara was moving on pure stubbornness. Her legs didn't want to work properly. Her vision kept narrowing to a tunnel. She'd fall and Rhett would haul her upright, and they'd keep going until she fell again. "There," Rhett's voice cut through her haze. "Look." She looked. Below them, visible through a gap in the trees, was a cluster of lights. Not many, a dozen, maybe 2 dozen. But lights meant people, meant civilization, meant Silver Creek. "How far?" she whispered. 2 miles. Maybe 3. He swayed on his feet. "We can make it." They didn't make it that night. They collapsed in a dry creek bed half a mile from town, too exhausted to take another step. Rhett tried to stand twice and failed both times. Alara couldn't even try. They lay on the rocky ground, their breathing harsh and labored, and waited for dawn or death, whichever came first. Dawn came. Alara woke to find Rhett already up, or trying to be. He'd made it to his knees before he stopped, head hanging, shoulders heaving. She crawled to him, her broken wrist screaming, and they leaned against each other like 2 broken pillars holding up empty air. "1 more mile," Rhett said. "I can't." "Yes, you can." "We're so close, Alara. We're right there." "You're bleeding again." "I know, doesn't matter. We get to town, find a doctor, get supplies. Then we rest. But first we have to move." She wanted to argue, wanted to lie down and sleep for a week. But he was right. They were so close. After everything they'd survived, to give up now would be obscene. She stood, fell, stood again. This time her legs held. Together, they walked the final mile. Silver Creek turned out to be even smaller than Alara had imagined. A single main street lined with false front buildings, half of them abandoned. A saloon, a general store, a livery stable, and what might have been a hotel. A few houses scattered on the outskirts. The whole town looked like it was holding on by its fingernails, waiting for an excuse to blow away. They stumbled down the main street in full daylight, and people stopped to stare. 2 bloodied, filthy strangers appearing out of the wilderness like refugees from some private war. Alara saw the judgment in their eyes, the suspicion. A woman in that condition with a man who clearly wasn't her husband? People could draw conclusions. "Doctor," Rhett said to the first person who approached, a middle-aged man in a storekeeper's apron. "Where's the doctor?" The man pointed to a house at the end of the street. "Doc Brennan, but he's—" They were already walking, or what passed for walking, more like controlled falling in a forward direction. The house was white clapboard with a shingle hanging out front. Medical services. The door was unlocked. They pushed through into a parlor that had been converted to a waiting room, and a woman looked up from behind a desk, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, with the no-nonsense air of someone who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by most of it. "Sweet Jesus," she said, standing. "What happened to you two?" "Hunting accident," Rhett said. It was the story they'd agreed on during the long walk. Simple. Plausible. We need the doctor. I'm the doctor. Martha Brennan. She was already moving toward them, professional hands reaching for Rhett's bloody shirt. Sit down before you fall down. She pointed at Alara. That wrist is broken, and you're both dehydrated and probably concussed. What were you hunting? Each other? Mountain lion, Alara said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. It attacked our camp. We got separated from our party. Dr. Brennan's eyes said she didn't believe a word of it, but her hands were gentle as she guided them to chairs. Your party know where you are? We got turned around, Rhett said. Just need some patching up, some supplies, and we'll be on our way. You need a week of bed rest and proper meals, but I doubt you'll listen to that. She turned to a cabinet, pulling out supplies. This is going to hurt. She wasn't lying. Setting Alara's wrist was a special kind of agony that made her bite through her lip to keep from screaming. Cleaning and stitching Rhett's wound wasn't much better, but Dr. Brennan worked efficiently, and by the time she finished, they were bandaged properly for the first time in days. You'll need to stay off that wrist for at least a month, she told Alara. And she fixed Rhett with a stern look, have cracked ribs and a nasty infection starting. You need rest, antibiotics, and someone making sure you don't do anything stupid. We'll manage, Rhett said. I'm sure you will. Stubbornness seems to be keeping you both upright. She washed her hands in a basin. That'll be $5 for the both of you. And before you tell me you don't have it, there's a hotel 2 doors down that needs help with their kitchen if the lady's willing to work for a few days. She looked at Rhett, can help at the livery if you can manage one arm. Bob's short-handed. Alara and Rhett exchanged glances. They'd hoped to push through, to keep moving west. But Dr. Brennan was right. They needed rest, and they needed money for supplies. A few days in Silver Creek might be the difference between making it to California and dying in the mountains. We'll take the work, Alara said. Thank you. Dr. Brennan nodded. Get yourselves cleaned up at the hotel. I'll let them know you're coming, and whatever you're running from... She held up a hand when Rhett started to protest. I don't want to know, but you should know that strangers asking questions came through town 2 days ago. 4 men, well-armed, looking for a couple matching your description. I told them I hadn't seen anyone. Other folks might not be so inclined to lie. Alara's blood turned to ice. They're here? In town? They left yesterday morning, headed west toward the California border, figured their quarry had slipped past them. She gave them a long look. I suggest you don't prove them wrong. Stay quiet, keep your heads down, and leave as soon as you're able. Silver Creek might be small, but word travels. They left the doctor's office with fresh bandages and a new problem. Marcus's men were ahead of them now, waiting somewhere on the road to California. The easy route was cut off. They'd have to find another way. But first, they had to survive the next few days. The hotel was called the Silver Rest, which was optimistic considering the state of the building. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips, the floorboards creaked with every step, and the whole structure leaned slightly to the left like a drunk trying to stay upright. But it had beds and a kitchen and a proprietor who didn't ask too many questions when Dr. Brennan vouched for them. Mrs. Chen was a Chinese woman in her 50s who'd outlasted 3 husbands and the silver boom that had briefly made the town prosperous. She looked at Alara's broken wrist and Rhett's bandaged ribs with the weary expression of someone who'd seen worse and decided it wasn't her business. You work, you get a room and meals, she said in accented but clear English. You steal or cause trouble, I shoot you. We understand each other? Yes, ma'am, Alara said. Good. You, she pointed at Rhett, can barely stand. Go upstairs, second door, sleep until you're useful. You, she turned to Alara, can work one-handed? I can try. Trying's not good enough in a kitchen, but we'll see. Come. Mrs. Chen led Alara through a narrow hallway to the back of the hotel, where a kitchen that had seen better days occupied a room barely large enough for 2 people. A wood stove radiated heat despite the morning hour, and various pots bubbled with things that smelled surprisingly good given the surroundings. I cook for hotel guests and sell meals to miners who come down from the hills, Mrs. Chen explained, moving around the space with practiced efficiency. Usually I have a girl to help, But she ran off with a prospector last month. Stupid girl. Now I do everything myself and I'm too old for this. She thrust a knife at Alara. You peel potatoes. Use your good hand. Drop the knife. You're fired. Alara took the knife and got to work. It was awkward with her left hand. She'd always been right-handed, and the first few potatoes came out looking more like abstract sculptures than food. But Mrs. Chen didn't complain, just corrected her technique with sharp words and sharper demonstrations, and gradually Alara found a rhythm. It felt strange to be doing something so mundane after days of running and hiding and fearing for her life. The normalcy of it was almost disorienting. Peel potatoes, chop vegetables, stir pots when Mrs. Chen barked orders. Her broken wrist throbbed constantly, but the pain was manageable, and the work kept her mind occupied. Around noon, Mrs. Chen fed her a bowl of rice and vegetables that Alara devoured without tasting. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until food was in front of her. Her stomach cramped at first, unaccustomed to actual nutrition, but she kept it down and immediately felt more human. Your man, Mrs. Chen said, watching her eat. He your husband? Alara nearly choked. No, he's just... We're traveling together. The sound was non-committal, but loaded with implication. You're running from something, or someone. Don't bother lying. I can see it. The way you watch the door, the way he checks every window. People don't move like that unless they're being hunted. There didn't seem to be any point in denying it. We had some trouble back home. Man trouble or law trouble? Man trouble. Mrs. Chen nodded as if this explained everything. Men are usually the trouble. My first husband, he drank, second one gambled, third one was just mean. I outlived all of them and good riddance. She refilled Alara's bowl without asking. Eat more. You're too skinny. Men like the one you're with, they need a woman who won't break. He's not. We're not like that. Not yet, maybe, but you will be. I see how he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching, and how you look at him. She waved a hand dismissively. Doesn't matter, not my business. Just don't bring your trouble to my door. I've worked too hard for what I have. Alara wanted to argue, to explain that there was nothing between her and Rhett except circumstance and survival. But the words stuck in her throat because maybe Mrs. Chen wasn't entirely wrong. In the hollow beneath the fallen pine, pressed against Rhett for warmth, she'd felt something shift. Not love, that was too big and too complicated for what they were going through, but connection, recognition. Two people who'd both lost things they couldn't get back, trying to build something from the wreckage. She finished her second bowl and got back to work. Upstairs, Rhett slept for 14 hours straight. When he finally stumbled down to the kitchen the next morning, he looked marginally less like a corpse. The color had returned to his face, and though he moved carefully, favoring his injured ribs, there was strength in his movements that hadn't been there before. You look better, Alara said. She was kneading bread dough. Mrs. Chen had determined she could manage that one-handed, and her good arm ached from the repetitive motion. Feel better. Still feel like I got kicked by a horse, but better. He accepted the coffee Mrs. Chen poured him, drinking it black and hot. How's the wrist? Hurts, but I'm managing. You should be resting. I'm fine. We need the money. She punched down the dough harder than necessary. Did you sleep at all? Some. Kept waking up thinking I heard riders. He glanced at the kitchen window, which faced the main street. Have you seen anyone suspicious? Everyone's suspicious when you're hiding, but no, nobody's asked about us specifically. She shaped the dough into loaves, her movements getting smoother with practice. Mrs. Chen thinks we're lovers running from my angry husband. Rhett nearly spit out his coffee. She what? It's a reasonable assumption given the circumstances. We're not... He stopped, looking uncomfortable. I should probably go to the livery. Bob's expecting me. He left before she could respond, and Alara found herself smiling despite everything. There was something almost funny about a man who could face down armed hunters without flinching, but got flustered at the suggestion of impropriety. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Alara worked in the kitchen from dawn until late afternoon, learning to compensate for her broken wrist, earning calluses on her left hand and Mrs. Chen's grudging approval. Rhett worked at the livery, mucking stalls and mending tack, tasks he could manage with one functional arm. They saw each other at meals, careful conversations in Mrs. Chen's dining room, talking around the things they didn't want to say. On the fourth day, everything changed. Alara was in the kitchen preparing vegetables for the evening meal when she heard horses on the main street. Not unusual. Silver Creek saw its share of traffic despite being mostly abandoned, but something about these horses made her pause. The way they moved, purposeful and coordinated. The way they stopped directly in front of the hotel. She moved to the window, staying back from the glass, and looked out. 4 men. Well-armed, well-dressed by Silver Creek standards. And one of them was scanning the buildings with the systematic attention of someone searching for something specific. Her blood turned to ice. "Mrs. Chen," she said quietly. "Those men who came through before, the ones asking questions, what did they look like?" Mrs. Chen came to the window, looked out, and her expression hardened. "Those are them. They came back." Alara's mind raced. Rhett was at the livery, 2 buildings down. If these men started asking questions again, if someone had seen them, recognized them, decided that the reward money was worth betraying strangers. She was already moving toward the back door when Mrs. Chen grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "Wait, if you run now, they'll see you. They'll know. I have to warn Rhett. Your man's smart enough to stay out of sight. You need to—" She paused, listening. Footsteps on the front porch. "Hide. Now. Kitchen closet." The closet was barely large enough for Alara to squeeze into, shelves pressing against her shoulders, the smell of flour and spices thick in the confined space. Mrs. Chen shoved her inside and closed the door just as the front bell rang. Through the crack in the door, Alara could see a sliver of the kitchen. She heard Mrs. Chen walk to the front room, heard the murmur of male voices, too low to make out words. Her heart hammered so hard she was certain it would give her away. Then footsteps, getting closer. Heavy boots on the wooden floor. A man's voice, closer now, speaking to Mrs. Chen. Looking for 2 people. A woman in her mid-20s, dark hair, slender build, traveling with a man, 30 to 35, lean, possibly injured. They would have come through here in the last few days. "I see many people," Mrs. Chen said, her voice bland. "This is a hotel. This is a dying town with maybe 50 people left in it. You'd remember 2 strangers showing up half dead. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. My memory, it's not so good anymore." A pause. Then the sound of coins hitting a table. "Perhaps this will help your memory." Another pause. Alara held her breath, her good hand clenched into a fist. Mrs. Chen could take the money. Should take the money. What loyalty did she owe to 2 fugitives who'd wandered into her hotel? "No strangers," Mrs. Chen said finally. "Just the usual miners coming and going. Nobody matching that description." "You're certain?" "I'm certain I want you out of my hotel. You're disturbing my guests." The man's voice turned cold. "We'll be staying in town for a few days, making inquiries. If you remember anything, there's more money where this came from. And if we find out you lied to us, I've lived through 3 husbands and a silver boom collapse. I'm not scared of you." Mrs. Chen's voice was flat, final. "Good day." The man left, but Alara could hear the other riders outside, their horses restless. She stayed in the closet, barely breathing, for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, Mrs. Chen opened the door. "They're watching the hotel," the older woman said. "Stationed a man across the street. They know you're here, or they suspect it." "Why didn't you tell them?" Alara climbed out of the closet, her legs shaking. "The money doesn't spend if you're dead. And men like that, they don't leave witnesses." "Mrs." Chen moved to the window, peering out carefully. "Besides, I meant what I said. I'm too old to be scared of bullies. We have to leave, tonight." "You can't. They're watching. The second you step outside, they'll have you." Mrs. Chen turned from the window, her expression thoughtful. "But your man, he's still at the livery. They haven't connected him yet. If he's smart, he'll stay there, act like just another drifter looking for work." "Rhett won't leave me." "Then you need to get a message to him. Tell him to play it normal, keep his head down. In 2 days, there's a supply wagon heading west to Sacramento. Driver's name is Pete Lawson. He owes me a favor. He can get you both out of town hidden in the cargo. 2 days? Alara's voice rose. They'll find us before then. Not if you stay smart and stay hidden. Mrs. Chen pulled a sack of flour from a shelf, checking the weight. You stay in the kitchen, out of sight. I'll say my helper took sick, went to her room. Meanwhile, you... She thrust a pencil and paper at Alara. Write a message to your man. I'll have it delivered. Alara's hand shook as she wrote. The note was brief, cryptic enough that if it was intercepted, it wouldn't immediately condemn them. Stay low, act normal. 2 days. Trust Mrs. C. She folded it, handed it back, and watched Mrs. Chen tuck it into her apron. I don't know how to thank you, Alara said. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this. Mrs. Chen headed toward the door, paused. That man you're running from, he must be powerful to send this many hunters this far. He is. And you chose to run rather than submit to him. That takes courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Mrs. Chen almost smiled. Stay in the kitchen, don't make noise, and pray those men get bored before Pete's wagon leaves. The next 2 days were the longest of Alara's life. She stayed in the kitchen, working when Mrs. Chen needed her, hiding in the closet when guests came through. She slept on a pallet on the floor, never undressing, always ready to move. Through the window, she could see the man watching the hotel, a silent presence across the street, who never seemed to sleep. Mrs. Chen brought news in fragments. Rhett had gotten the message. He was staying at the livery, working, acting natural. The hunters were asking questions throughout town, offering money for information. So far, nobody had talked, but it was only a matter of time. Silver Creek was poor and getting poorer. Eventually, someone would decide the reward was worth the risk. On the evening of the second day, Dr. Brennan came to the kitchen's back door. She slipped in quickly, her medical bag over her shoulder, and fixed Alara with a stern look. Those men are offering $200 for information leading to your capture, she said without preamble. That's more money than most people in this town will see in 5 years. The only reason you're not in chains right now is because they're also making it clear what happens to people who help fugitives. Fear's balancing out greed, but that won't last. The wagon leaves tomorrow morning, Alara said. I know. I'm going to check on your wrist now, and while I do that, you're going to listen very carefully to what I tell you. She unwrapped Alara's bandage, examining the swollen flesh with professional detachment. The wagon will stop at the edge of town at dawn. Pete will load his regular cargo, mining supplies, some furniture. You and your man will be hidden in a false bottom he's building tonight. It's going to be cramped and uncomfortable, and you won't be able to move for several hours. We can manage. There's more. Those hunters aren't stupid. They'll likely search the wagon before it leaves town. You'll need to stay absolutely silent, absolutely still, no matter what happens. If they find you, I know. Alara met her eyes. They'll kill Rhett and drag me back to Marcus. I understand the stakes. Dr. Brennan nodded, rewrapping the wrist with fresh bandages. The bone's setting well. You've been lucky, or stubborn, possibly both. She packed up her bag. I'll be there tomorrow morning with my medical supplies. If they search Pete's wagon, they'll have to search mine too, and I won't make it easy for them. Buy you some time. Why are you helping us? The doctor paused at the door. Because 20 years ago, I was in a situation not unlike yours. A man who thought he owned me. No way out. Someone helped me then, a stranger who owed me nothing. I made it to San Francisco, built a life, became a doctor. Then I came here to help people who have nowhere else to go. She opened the door, checked the alley. Pay it forward someday? That's all I ask. Then she was gone, leaving Alara alone with her thoughts and her fear. That night, she didn't sleep at all, just sat by the window, watching the street, watching the watcher across the way. Somewhere out there, Rhett was doing the same thing, waiting, hoping, knowing that tomorrow would either be their escape or their end. Dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. Mrs. Chen woke her, though she hadn't been sleeping, with a hand on her shoulder. It's time. Alara followed her through the dark hotel, down a back staircase she hadn't known existed, and out into the alley behind the building. The air was cold, that pre-dawn chill that made breath visible and bones ache. At the end of the alley, a wagon waited, Pete Lawson on the driver's seat looking nervous and determined in equal measure. Rhett was already there, a shadow detaching from other shadows. He looked exhausted but alert, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. When he saw Alara, something in his expression eased. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "Still breathing." "That's something." Pete climbed down from the wagon, moved to the back, and pulled aside a tarp. Underneath, what looked like a normal cargo bed. But when he pressed a hidden latch, a section of the floor lifted to reveal a narrow compartment beneath. "It's not much," he admitted, "but it's the best I could do in 2 days. You'll have to lie flat, stay quiet. I've got legitimate cargo loaded on top. They'll have to unload half the wagon to find you, and I'm betting they won't bother." "How long?" Rhett asked. "Till we clear town? Maybe an hour, till the first real stop where you can get out. 3, maybe 4 hours. Can you manage?" Alara looked at the compartment. It was barely large enough for one person, let alone 2. They'd be pressed together, unable to move, in total darkness. But the alternative was capture. "We can manage," she said. Getting into the compartment was harder than it looked. Rhett went first, lying on his back, his injured ribs protesting. Then Alara, fitting herself against him, their bodies aligned by necessity rather than choice. The space was so tight she could feel his heartbeat against her back, could smell the sweat and dirt and fear on both of them. "Remember," Pete said from above, his face a pale circle in the dimness. "Absolute silence, no matter what." Then the floor closed over them, and they were in darkness. The cargo began loading immediately. Alara heard the thud of crates being placed above them, felt the wagon shift and settle with each addition. The weight pressed down on the false floor, and she had a moment of pure panic imagining it collapsing, crushing them beneath mining equipment and furniture. Rhett's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed once. She squeezed back and the panic receded slightly. The wagon started moving. Every bump and jolt sent pain through Alara's broken wrist, through Rhett's ribs. The air in the compartment was already getting stale, thick with the smell of wood and fear. She focused on breathing shallowly, evenly, trying not to think about the weight above them or the hunters somewhere nearby. They'd been moving for maybe 15 minutes when the wagon stopped. Voices outside, muffled by wood and cargo. Pete's voice, loud and unconcerned. Then another voice, male, authoritative. One of the hunters. "Need to check your cargo, friend." "Check away, just mining supplies and some furniture heading to Sacramento. You'll find it all matches my manifest." "We'll be the judge of that." The sounds of cargo being moved, crates dragging across wood directly above Alara's head. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain they'd hear it. Beside her, Rhett had gone absolutely still, not even seeming to breathe. More movement, heavier items being shifted. A crate landed hard enough to make the false floor creak, and Alara bit her lip to keep from gasping. Blood filled her mouth, coppery and warm. "What's this section here?" The hunter's voice, closer now, directly above them. "Storage compartment, keep my tools and such." "Want me to open it?" A pause that lasted forever. Alara could hear her own pulse in her ears, could feel Rhett's hand tightening on hers until her bones ground together. Then another voice, also above them, but from a different direction. "Dr. Brennan." "Gentlemen, I'm trying to load medical supplies here, and you're blocking my wagon. Do you have official authority to delay commerce in this town? Because if not, you need to move." "We're conducting a search, ma'am." "I can see that. And I'm conducting my rounds, so either get a warrant from whatever authority you're pretending to represent, or get out of my way." More arguing, but it was moving away from Pete's wagon. The doctor was drawing their attention, buying precious time. Alara heard Pete start loading cargo again, moving quickly now, and felt the wagon shift as he climbed back onto the driver's seat. "Everything's in order here," Pete called out, his voice steady. "Unless you want to reimburse me for delayed delivery, I'm leaving." The wagon started moving again. Slowly at first, then picking up speed. Alara waited for shouts, for the sound of pursuit, but there was only the creak of wheels and the clip of horses' hooves on packed dirt. They'd made it out of town. She didn't dare believe it yet. Kept expecting the wagon to stop, to hear Pete's voice selling them out, to have the floor ripped open and daylight and guns pointed at their faces. But the wagon kept moving, the sound of Silver Creek fading behind them, and gradually the terror receded enough that she could think. "You all right?" Rhett whispered, so quiet she barely heard him. "Yes." "You?" "My ribs are screaming, but I'm alive." "That's good enough." They stayed silent after that, conserving air, conserving strength. The compartment was an oven in the growing heat of day, sweat pooling between their bodies, but neither complained. Complaint was a luxury they couldn't afford. Finally, after what felt like days but was probably closer to 3 hours, the wagon stopped. The cargo above them shifted, being unloaded. Then the floor opened and Pete's face appeared, sunlight haloing his head like something holy. "We're clear," he said. 20 miles from Silver Creek. I'll get you out of there." Climbing out was agony. Alara's muscles had locked up in the confined space, and her broken wrist had stiffened to near uselessness. Rhett had to lift her bodily from the compartment, and even he struggled with his injured ribs. They collapsed beside the wagon, breathing real air, feeling sunlight, alive against all odds. "There's a way station another 10 miles west," Pete said, handing them a canteen. "I can take you that far, but after that, you're on your own. Can't risk being seen with fugitives. I've got a family to think about." "We understand," Rhett said, "and we're grateful. More than we can say." Pete nodded, uncomfortable with the thanks. "Mrs. Chen packed you some supplies, food, blankets, a bit of money, and this," he handed Rhett a piece of paper, "is a name and address in Sacramento. Friend of mine who might be able to help you get established. No promises, but it's something." They rode the rest of the way in the open air, and Alara had never appreciated freedom more. The wind on her face, the sky overhead, the simple fact of being able to move and breathe and exist outside a coffin-sized box. She'd been certain she'd die in that compartment, buried alive while hunters walked overhead. But she hadn't. They'd made it. The way station was a rough structure at a crossroads, more barn than building. Pete let them off there, pressed a few more supplies into their hands, and drove away without looking back. Smart man. The less he knew about where they went next, the better for everyone. Alara and Rhett stood in the dust, watching the wagon disappear, and then they were alone again. Just the two of them, and the road west, and whatever came next. "We should keep moving," Rhett said. "Put more distance between us and Silver Creek." "I know." But Alara didn't move. Couldn't move. The adrenaline that had kept her upright was draining away, leaving her hollow and shaking. "Rhett, what if they're ahead of us? Dr. Brennan said they went west. We could be walking right into them." "Then we'll deal with it when it happens." He looked at her, and his eyes were steady. "We've made it this far. Through mountains and gunfire and hiding in a box barely big enough to breathe in. We can make it the rest of the way." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true. Or it will be if we don't give up." He held out his hand. "Come on, California's waiting." She took his hand and let him pull her upright. Her body protested, every muscle screaming, but she could walk. That was enough. They headed west, two fugitives on a road with no guarantees, trusting each other because they had no other choice. The road west was nothing more than packed dirt, worn smooth by wagon wheels, and the passage of thousands who'd come before them chasing dreams of gold or land or escape. Alara and Rhett walked through the afternoon heat, their shadows stretching long beside them, and she tried not to think about how exposed they were. Anyone on horseback could overtake them in minutes. Anyone watching from the hills could pick them off without effort. But the road stayed empty, and they stayed alive, and that had to be enough. By evening, Alara's legs were trembling with exhaustion. Her broken wrist throbbed with every heartbeat, and the makeshift splint Dr. Brennan had fashioned was rubbing her skin raw. Rhett wasn't faring much better. She could see him favoring his left side, his breathing shallow to avoid stressing his cracked ribs. They were both falling apart by degrees. "There," Rhett pointed to a stand of cottonwoods near what might have been a creek bed. "We can camp there for the night." The creek was mostly dry, just a trickle of water between rocks, but it was enough. They filled their canteen and ate the food Mrs. Chen had packed, bread and dried meat, and some withered apples that tasted like heaven. Rhett tried to build a fire, but Alara stopped him. "Too risky, if they're out here somewhere." "I know." He sat back, abandoning the attempt. "But it's going to be cold tonight." "We've been cold before." They had. In the mountains, in the hollow beneath the fallen pine, pressed together for warmth while terror kept them from sleep. This would be no different, except it was different somehow. The danger felt less immediate here, the threat more distant. For the first time since climbing out her bedroom window, Alara felt like she could actually breathe. "Tell me about Sacramento," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own thoughts. "Your friend there, what's he like?" Rhett leaned back against a cottonwood trunk, his eyes on the darkening sky. "His name's Joel Martinez. Known him about 8 years. He runs a freight business. Does pretty well for himself. Honest, as much as anyone can be in that line of work. I saved his life once, got him out of a card game that was about to turn bloody. He's the type who remembers debts. You think he'll help us?" "Help you, definitely. He's got connections, knows people who need workers, can get you set up with a new name if needed. Me?" He shrugged, winced at the motion. "I'm not staying. Told you that from the start." The words shouldn't have stung, but they did. Alara had known this was temporary, that Rhett's help came with an expiration date. But somewhere between Silver Creek and here, she'd started to forget that, started to imagine a different ending. "Where will you go?" she asked. "North, probably. Oregon, maybe. Somewhere Marcus Voss's money doesn't reach." He glanced at her. "You'll be all right without me. You're tougher than you think." "I don't feel tough. Tough people rarely do. They just keep moving forward because stopping means dying." He shifted, trying to find a position that didn't make his ribs scream. "You're going to make it, Alara. Build a new life, become someone Marcus can't touch. I'm sure of it." She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't sure of anything anymore. But exhaustion was pulling at her, making her thoughts fuzzy and disconnected. She wrapped herself in one of Mrs. Chen's blankets and lay down on the hard ground, and despite everything, sleep found her quickly. She woke to Rhett shaking her shoulder, his hand over her mouth. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. Her heart lurched into her throat. She nodded, and he removed his hand slowly. In the darkness, she could see tension in every line of his body. He pointed east, back the way they'd come. At first she heard nothing. Then distant but unmistakable, hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving at a steady pace, coming closer. They gathered their few belongings in frantic silence, moving away from the road and deeper into the cottonwoods. The trees offered minimal cover, but it was better than being caught in the open. They pressed themselves into the shadow of a fallen trunk, barely breathing, as the riders approached. 4 of them. Maybe 5. It was hard to tell in the darkness. They passed on the road not 30 yards from where Alara and Rhett hid, close enough that she could hear their voices. "Waste of time. They could be anywhere by now. Marcus is paying too much for us to give up. We keep searching. Marcus can go to hell. I signed on for a week, not a goddamn odyssey. You want to be the one to tell him we quit? Because I sure don't." The voices faded as the riders continued west. Alara waited until the hoofbeats disappeared entirely before she let herself relax. Rhett stayed tense beside her, watching, listening. "They're ahead of us," he said finally. "Between us and Sacramento. Maybe they'll give up. You heard them. They're tired of searching. Men like that don't give up when there's money involved. They'll keep looking until Marcus tells them to stop. And Marcus," he paused, "Marcus doesn't strike me as the type who knows when to quit." Alara thought of her would-be husband, his cold eyes and colder smile, the way he'd grabbed her arm in the general store hard enough to leave bruises. Rhett was right. Marcus would hunt her to the ends of the earth if that's what it took to prove he couldn't be defied. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We get creative." Rhett stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "The main road's compromised, but there are other ways to California." "Other ways?" "Rhett, we're on foot with almost no supplies and I can barely use one arm. We can't exactly blaze a new trail through the wilderness." "We don't have to. There's a stage route that runs south of here, connects to the railroad at a town called Bitter Springs. We catch the stage, take the train west. We'll be in San Francisco before Marcus's men figure out they're looking in the wrong place." It sounded too simple. "We don't have money for stage tickets. We have a little, for Mrs. Chen and Dr. Brennan. It might be enough if we're careful." "And if it's not?" He met her eyes, and there was something harder in his expression now, something she hadn't seen before. Then I'll figure something out, cards maybe. Or I'll work a few days, earn what we need. One way or another, we're getting you to California." The determination in his voice left no room for argument. Ilara nodded, too tired to fight about hypotheticals. They'd solve each problem as it came. That was all they could do. They walked south through the night, avoiding the main road, following game trails and creek beds. The terrain was rougher this way, slower going, but it kept them hidden. By dawn, they were both exhausted and lost, standing on a ridge looking down at landscape that all looked the same. Rolling hills, scattered trees, empty sky. "Do you actually know where we're going?" Ilara asked. "Generally south. Bitter Springs should be, He squinted at the horizon. "That direction. I think." "You think?" "I'm not a goddamn compass, Ilara. I'm doing the best I can." The snap in his voice surprised her. In all their time together, through everything they'd survived, Rhett had been unfailingly calm. But he was hurting now. She could see it. The wound in his side had started bleeding again, soaking through his bandages. His face was pale and drawn. He'd been pushing himself too hard for too long, running on determination and not much else. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean—" "I know." He rubbed his face with his good hand. "I'm just tired. We both are. Let's keep moving. We'll find the stage route eventually." They found it 2 hours later, more by accident than design. A rutted road cutting east to west through the hills, with fresh wheel marks indicating recent traffic. They followed it west, staying off the road itself, watching for travelers. The stage station appeared around midday, a squat building with a corral and stable. Smoke rose from a chimney, and Ilara could smell cooking food that made her stomach clench with hunger. They'd finished Mrs. Chen's supplies that morning. Whatever came next, they'd need to buy or beg. "Let me do the talking," Rhett said as they approached. "You're my wife. We're heading to San Francisco because your mother's sick. Simple story, hard to verify. I'm getting good at lying. You're getting good at surviving. There's a difference." The station keeper was a heavy-set man with suspicious eyes and hands that never strayed far from the shotgun behind his counter. He looked them over, dirty, injured, desperate, and his expression said he'd seen their type before and wasn't impressed. "Stage comes through tomorrow morning," he said. $2 per person to Bitter Springs. $4. They had 6 total. Ilara felt her stomach sink. "We'll take 2 tickets," Rhett said, pulling out their money. "You got identification? Papers?" "Lost them in a robbery. That's why we're trying to get to San Francisco. Need to get to family." The station keeper's eyes narrowed. "Robbery, huh? You report it to the law?" "We were in the middle of nowhere when it happened. By the time we found help, the thieves were long gone." It was a good lie, delivered smoothly, but the station keeper didn't look convinced. "I don't like trouble at my station. You two look like trouble." "We're not," Ilara started, but Rhett cut her off. "We'll wait outside until the stage arrives. Pay you now, leave you alone. You'll never know we were here." Money changed hands. The station keeper counted it twice, then nodded grudgingly. "Stage leaves at dawn. Miss it, and I keep the money. And if you cause any problems—" "We won't," Rhett assured him. "You have our word." They spent the rest of that day and night in the stable, huddled in an empty stall, trying to stay warm. The station keeper brought them some bread and watery stew, though he charged them their last $2 for it. By the time they'd paid, they were completely broke. Whatever happened in Bitter Springs, they'd be relying on Joel Martinez's goodness, assuming he was even there, assuming he'd help, assuming they made it that far. Too many assumptions. But there was no other choice. The stage arrived just after dawn, pulled by 6 horses and carrying 4 other passengers. A merchant, 2 miners heading back east, and a woman in widow's black who didn't speak to anyone. The driver loaded their minimal luggage, eyeing Rhett's bandaged ribs and Ilara's splinted wrist with poorly concealed suspicion. "You two gonna make it to Bitter Springs without dying on me?" he asked. "We'll manage," Rhett said. "See that you do. I don't stop for medical emergencies unless there's extra pay involved." The ride was brutal. The stage bounced over every rut and rock, throwing passengers against each other. Ilara's broken wrist took repeated impacts that brought tears to her eyes. Rhett sat rigid beside her, his jaw clenched, clearly in agony, but refusing to show it. The other passengers gradually stopped trying to make conversation, recognizing that Alara and Rhett weren't interested in pleasantries. They stopped twice for fresh horses, both times at stations even more remote than the first. Alara used the opportunity to stretch her legs and try to work some feeling back into her numb backside. Everything hurt. She was so tired of hurting. "Almost there," Rhett said during the second stop, his voice low. "Bitter Springs is the next station, then the railroad to San Francisco. And then what? Then you start over. New name, new life. Joel will help set you up with work, maybe a place to stay. You'll be safe." "Will I?" She looked at him, really looked at him. Marcus has money and reach and patience. What if he finds me anyway? What if he never stops looking? "Then you'll deal with it when it happens. But you'll be dealing with it as a free woman who chose her own path, not as someone's property." He touched her shoulder, brief and careful. "That matters, Alara. Don't forget it matters." The stage rolled into Bitter Springs just before sunset. The town was larger than Silver Creek, more prosperous, with actual buildings made of brick and a railroad station at the far end of the main street. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys. People moved through the streets with purpose. It looked like civilization, like safety, like a place Marcus Voss's shadow couldn't reach. It looked like a lie. They disembarked from the stage, and Alara immediately felt eyes on them. Too many eyes. A man leaning against a storefront looked at them too long. A woman sweeping a porch stopped mid-stroke to stare. The feeling crawled up Alara's spine like a warning. "Something's wrong," she whispered to Rhett. "I feel it too. Stay close." They walked toward the railroad station, trying to look casual, trying not to run. Behind them, Alara heard footsteps matching their pace. She didn't look back. Looking back would confirm they knew they were being followed. The railroad station was busy with travelers waiting for the evening train west. Rhett approached the ticket window, while Alara hung back, watching the crowd. The man who'd been following them entered through the main door, his eyes scanning the room. He saw Alara and stopped, his hand moving toward his coat. "Rhett!" she hissed. He turned, saw the man, understood immediately. "How much for 2 tickets to San Francisco?" The clerk behind the window consulted a chart. $6. They didn't have $6. They didn't have 6 cents. "We need those tickets," Rhett said, his voice tight. "And I need $6. No money, no tickets. That's how it works." The man was moving toward them now, pushing through the crowd. Others were looking at Alara and Rhett with recognition. Had Marcus's men been here? Had they shown sketches, offered rewards? Rhett grabbed Alara's hand. "Run!" They bolted for the back exit, shoving through startled travelers, ignoring shouts of protest. The man behind them gave chase, and Alara heard him yell for others to help. They burst out the back door into an alley, and Rhett pulled her left toward the rail yards. "The train!" he gasped. "If we can get on the train—" But the evening train was already moving, pulling away from the platform, picking up speed. They'd never catch it. They were trapped in a town that knew they were fugitives, with no money, no plan, and hunters closing in. Rhett looked around desperately, saw a freight car with its door partially open, and made a decision. He ran alongside the moving train, matching its speed, then grabbed the edge of the freight car and hauled himself up with a cry of pain. He turned back, reaching for Alara. "Jump!" She was running as fast as her exhausted legs would carry her, the train pulling ahead, Rhett's hand extended toward her. Behind her, shouts and the sound of pursuit. She had one chance, one moment to decide between capture and a leap that could kill her. She jumped. Her good hand caught Rhett's, fingers locking around his wrist. For a horrible second she hung in space, her feet kicking empty air, the ground racing by beneath her. Then Rhett was pulling her up with strength born of desperation, and she was tumbling into the freight car, landing hard on wooden crates. Rhett slammed the door shut just as gunfire erupted. Bullets punched through the wooden walls, splintering the crates around them. They pressed themselves flat, covering their heads, as the train picked up speed and Bitter Springs fell away behind them. When the shooting stopped, Alara lay there gasping, her entire body shaking. They'd made it. Somehow, impossibly, they'd made it onto the train. They were heading west without tickets, without money, probably with half of Bitter Springs sending telegrams ahead about fugitives on the freight line. But they were alive. Rhett sat up slowly, his face twisted with pain. Blood was soaking through his shirt again, more than before. The jump onto the train had torn something open. "Let me see," Ilara said, crawling to him. "It's fine. It's not fine. Stop being stubborn and let me look." She peeled back his shirt and her breath caught. The wound had reopened completely, and it looked infected, red and swollen, seeping fluid that wasn't quite blood. He needed antibiotics, proper medical care, probably stitches. All things they didn't have access to on a freight train racing through the night. "How bad?" Rhett asked. "Bad enough." She used strips from her dress, getting shorter by the day, to rebind the wound, working as gently as she could. "You need a doctor." "I'll get one in San Francisco." "You might not make it to San Francisco." "Then I'll die on this train, but I'm not stopping, not when we're this close." The stubbornness should have frustrated her, but instead it made something in her chest ache. He'd been carrying her this whole way, sacrificing his own safety for hers, and even now, bleeding and fevered, he refused to quit. "Why?" The question came out small. "Why are you doing this? And don't tell me it's because of your sister. There's something else. Something you're not saying." Rhett was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the freight car's ceiling. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "You want the truth? I'm tired of being the kind of man who runs. I've been running my whole life, from bad choices, bad debts, bad reputation. Every town I leave behind, I tell myself the next one will be different. But it never is, because I bring myself with me." "That doesn't answer my question." "I'm getting there." He shifted, grimacing. "When I saw you in that general store with Marcus, I saw a chance to be someone different, someone who helps instead of just surviving. I thought if I could get you out, get you safe, maybe it would prove I'm not completely worthless, that I can do something good before I—" He stopped. "Before you what?" "Before I disappear, which is what men like me do. We drift and we disappear, and nobody remembers we were here." He looked at her then, and his eyes were bright with fever and something else. "But if I can get you to safety, if I can help you build a new life, then maybe I'll have mattered, just once. That's all I want." Ilara felt tears burning in her eyes. She'd been so focused on her own survival, her own fear, that she hadn't seen the depth of his. He was as trapped as she'd been, just in a different way. Running from a past he couldn't change, trying to outrun the man he thought he was. "You matter," she said. "You've mattered every day since you knocked on my door in Ashford Bend. You matter to me." He smiled, sad and small. "Then we better both make it to California. I'd hate to disappoint you." The freight train rolled through the night, carrying them west toward salvation or destruction. Neither of them was sure which. They took turns sleeping, though Rhett's sleep was fitful, broken by fever dreams that made him call out names Ilara didn't recognize. She kept watch, monitoring his wound, rationing the last of their water. By dawn, Rhett's fever was worse. He was shivering despite the growing heat in the freight car, his skin pale and clammy. The infection was spreading. Ilara had seen enough sickness on the ranch to know that without treatment, it would kill him. Soon. The train slowed around mid-morning, and Ilara risked opening the door a crack to see where they were. A small town, barely more than a cluster of buildings around the tracks. The train wasn't stopping, just slowing to pass through safely. She made a decision. "We're getting off," she told Rhett. "What?" "No, we keep going. You need a doctor, now, or you're going to die, and I didn't come this far to watch you die on a train car floor." "Ilara, don't argue with me. You've been making decisions for both of us since we left Ashford Bend. Now it's my turn." She positioned herself by the door, judging the train's speed. "When I say jump, you jump. Understand?" He looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too weak. He just nodded and moved to the door beside her. The train was going maybe 15 miles per hour, slow enough to survive jumping from, but fast enough to do damage if they landed wrong. Ilara waited until they passed the town's buildings and entered an open field, then pushed the door fully open. "Now!" They jumped together, hitting the ground hard and rolling. Ilara felt something in her already broken wrist give way with a snap that made her vision go white. Rhett hit the ground and didn't get up, Just lay there in the grass while the train continued on without them. Alara crawled to him, fighting through pain and nausea. Rhett, talk to me. His eyes opened, unfocused. That was stupid. Probably, but you're alive. She got her good arm under his shoulders, tried to lift him. Come on, town's not far, we can make it. Getting him upright was a nightmare. Getting him walking was worse. But somehow they stumbled across the field and into the outskirts of the town, population maybe 200, with a sign that read, Pine Vale. There was a doctor's office with a shingle hanging crooked over the door. Alara half-carried, half-dragged Rhett up the steps and through the door. A young man looked up from a desk, his eyes widening at the sight of them. Please, Alara said. He needs help. The young man, Dr. Harrison, according to the name on his door, took one look at Rhett's wound and went into action. He got Rhett onto an examination table, calling for his assistant, working with the efficient movements of someone who knew what he was doing. Alara stood back, swaying on her feet, watching through a haze of exhaustion and pain. What happened to him? Dr. Harrison asked as he worked. Gunshot. Over a week ago. It got infected. I can see that. He needs antibiotics, probably surgery to clean out the infection. He glanced at her. And you need that wrist reset properly before it heals wrong. When's the last time either of you ate? I don't remember. Right, Sarah, he called to his assistant, get them both something to eat and prepare for surgery. This is going to be delicate. Alara wanted to ask how much it would cost, wanted to explain they had no money, but the words wouldn't come. She was so tired. So impossibly tired. The room was spinning, and Dr. Harrison's voice was getting distant, and then the floor was rushing up to meet her, and everything went black. She woke in a bed. Clean sheets, soft pillow, sunlight streaming through a window. For a moment she thought she was back in Ashford Bend, that everything had been a terrible dream. Then she tried to move her right arm and pain shot through her wrist, and reality came flooding back. Easy. Dr. Harrison appeared beside the bed. I reset your wrist properly and put it in a real cast. You're going to need to wear it for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer depending on how it heals. Rhett, she managed, where's... Alive. Barely. I removed a lot of infected tissue, cleaned the wound, started him on antibiotics. The next 24 hours will tell us if it worked. He helped her sit up. You've been asleep for almost a full day. A day. They'd lost an entire day. Marcus's men could have caught up by now, could be searching this town. Nobody's looking for you here, Dr. Harrison said, reading her expression. I don't know what trouble you're running from, and I don't want to know. But my assistant Sarah, she's good at keeping secrets, and I believe in helping people first, asking questions later. We can't pay you, Alara said. We don't have any money. I figured, that's all right. You can work it off once you're both healed. I need help around here anyway. He handed her a glass of water. Drink, then sleep some more. Your body's been through hell. She wanted to argue, to insist on seeing Rhett, but exhaustion dragged her back down into darkness. When she woke again, it was night. She made her way out of the room on shaky legs and found Rhett in another bed nearby, hooked up to an IV drip that Dr. Harrison had rigged from God knows what. He was pale and still, but breathing, alive. Alara pulled a chair to his bedside and sat, taking his hand with her good one. His skin was cooler now, the fever broken. She watched his chest rise and fall, and something inside her that had been wound tight for weeks finally began to loosen. They'd made it. Not to California yet, but to a place where they could breathe, where they could heal. It was enough. Rhett's eyes opened, found her in the dimness. You jumped off a train. You would have done the same. Probably. His grip on her hand strengthened slightly. Thank you for not letting me die. We're even then. You didn't let me get married to Marcus Voss. I didn't let you die of an infection. Fair trade. He smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it reached his eyes. When did you get so stubborn? I learned from an expert. She leaned back in the chair, not letting go of his hand. Dr. Harrison says we can work off our medical debt. Might take a while. How long? Few months, maybe, if we're lucky. Rhett was quiet, processing this. A few months in Pine Vale meant a few months not moving, not running. It meant staying in one place, being visible, taking the risk that Marcus's hunters would find them. But it also meant healing, actually healing, not just slapping bandages on wounds and pushing forward. "All right," he said finally. "We stay." The first month in Pinevale passed in a strange haze of routine and recovery. Alara worked in Dr. Harrison's office, learning to clean instruments one-handed, to prepare bandages, to keep records of patients and supplies. Sarah taught her the basics of nursing care, how to check for fever, how to change dressings without causing unnecessary pain, how to read the small signs that distinguished a patient getting better from one getting worse. Rhett, once he could stand without passing out, helped with whatever physical labor the doctor needed, chopping wood, hauling water, repairing the roof that had been leaking since last winter. He moved carefully, his injured side still tender, but the infection had cleared and his strength was slowly returning. They lived in a small room behind the doctor's office, sharing the space with the awkward politeness of two people who'd survived too much together to be strangers, but hadn't yet figured out what they were to each other. At night, lying on opposite sides of the room, Alara would hear Rhett's breathing and remember the mountain hollow, the freight car. All the times they'd pressed together for warmth or safety. The distance between them now felt wrong somehow, but neither of them talked about it. Pinevale was small enough that strangers were noticed, but the residents seemed inclined to accept Dr. Harrison's explanation that Alara and Rhett were distant relatives fallen on hard times. Or maybe they just didn't care. Small towns had their own problems without borrowing others. Still, Alara stayed cautious. She kept her hair covered when she went outside, avoided the main street when possible, and never stayed in one place long enough for anyone to study her face. Rhett did the same. His hat always pulled low, his eyes always scanning for threats that might never come. "You're going to wear yourself out being this tense," Sarah said one afternoon. She was a practical woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. "Been here 6 weeks and you still jump every time the door opens." "Hard habit to break," Alara said, rolling fresh bandages. "Must have been something serious, what you're running from." "It was." Sarah waited, but Alara didn't elaborate. After a moment, the older woman shrugged. "Well, whatever it was doesn't seem to have followed you here. Maybe you're finally safe." Alara wanted to believe that, but safety felt like a luxury she couldn't afford to trust. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October. Dr. Harrison handed it to Rhett without comment, and Rhett stared at it like it might explode. The return address was Sacramento. Joel Martinez. "How did he know we were here?" Alara asked, watching Rhett turn the envelope over in his hands. "I sent him a letter 3 weeks ago. Figured it was time to let him know we were alive." He opened it carefully, read the contents, and his expression shifted through several emotions Alara couldn't quite identify. "He wants us to come to Sacramento. Says he's got work for both of us if we want it. Real work. Good pay." "What kind of work?" "For you, bookkeeping. He knows someone who runs a textile business, needs someone who can manage accounts. For me," he paused, "he needs a freight manager, someone who can coordinate shipments, deal with suppliers." It was everything they'd been running toward: jobs, stability, a chance to disappear into a city large enough that Marcus's reach might not extend. But Alara felt her chest tighten at the thought of leaving Pinevale. They'd built something here, small and fragile, but theirs. "When does he need an answer?" she asked. "Soon. He says the bookkeeping position won't stay open long." They didn't discuss it that day or the next, just went about their work with the letter sitting between them like an accusation. Finally, on the third day, Rhett brought it up while they were eating dinner in their small room. "You should go," he said. "To Sacramento. Take the job. It's what we planned." "What about you?" "I'll go too. Work for Joel, pay off our debts to Dr. Harrison, save some money, then—" He shrugged. "Then I'll figure out what's next." "You're still planning to leave?" It wasn't a question. "That was always the plan, Alara. Get you safe, get you settled, then move on. I'm not—" He stopped, searching for words. "I'm not the kind of man who stays." "Maybe you could be." The words hung in the air between them. Rhett looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of being hunted or shot at or starving in the wilderness. Something deeper and more personal. "You don't want that," he said finally. "You don't want someone like me. I'm wanted in 3 territories. I've got debts I'll probably never pay off, and I'm not built for the kind of life you deserve. What I deserve? Alara felt anger kindle in her chest. You know what I deserve, Rhett? I deserve to make my own choices for once in my life. Not have my father choose my husband, not have Marcus choose my future, and not have you choose to leave because you've decided I'm better off without you. That's not what isn't it? She stood, her casted wrist throbbing from the sudden movement. You've spent this whole time protecting me, saving me, making decisions about what's best for me. But the one thing you won't do is ask me what I actually want. Fine. His voice was rough. What do you want? The question stopped her. What did she want? A month ago, she would have said safety, a new name, a quiet life, distance from everything she'd left behind. But somewhere between Ashford Bend and Pine Vale, her wants had shifted, complicated, grown beyond simple survival. I want to stop running, she said quietly. I want to build something that's mine. And she met his eyes. I want you to stop acting like you're not worth staying for. Rhett looked away, his jaw tight. I don't know how to do this. The staying, the building something, I've never been good at it. Neither have I. We'll figure it out together. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not enough? Alara crossed to where he sat, using her good hand to turn his face back toward hers. You jumped off a moving train because I asked you to. You've been shot at, beaten up, and half-starved, keeping me alive. If that's not enough, I don't know what is. He laughed, shaky and surprised. When did you get so sure of yourself? I learned from an expert. She echoed his words from weeks ago and saw him recognize them. So what do you say? Do we go to Sacramento together? Not as a drifter and the woman he's helping, but as whatever we decide to be? Rhett stood, his hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. You're sure? Because once I stay, I stay. I'm not the kind of man who does things halfway. I'm sure. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. She kissed him back, tasting coffee and possibility and the future they were choosing together. When they broke apart, both were smiling. We're probably making a mistake, Rhett said. Probably. But it's our mistake to make. They left for Sacramento 2 weeks later, their debts to Dr. Harrison paid, their few possessions packed into a single bag. Sarah hugged Alara at the train station, pressed something into her hand, a small silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother, and told her to write. Doctor. Harrison shook Rhett's hand and told him to take care of himself, to not do anything stupid. The train ride west was nothing like the terrified flight in the freight car. This time they had tickets, seats in a passenger car, and the luxury of watching the landscape roll by without fear. Alara sat by the window, her casted wrist resting in her lap, and let herself imagine what came next. Sacramento was overwhelming at first. More people in one place than Alara had ever seen, buildings that stretched 3 and 4 stories high, noise and chaos, and the constant movement of a city that never quite stopped. Joel Martinez met them at the station, a broad-shouldered man with an easy smile and eyes that didn't miss much. You look like hell, he told Rhett, pulling him into a brief embrace. But you're alive, which is more than I expected when I got your letter. It was a close thing, Rhett admitted. Joel turned to Alara, offering his hand. Joel Martinez, I've heard a lot about you, about Alara Voss. The name still felt strange, like clothing that didn't quite fit. She'd need a new one eventually, something that didn't tie her to Thomas or Marcus or Ashford Bend. Alara Voss for now, Joel said, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy. We'll work on getting you proper documentation under whatever name you choose. I know people who can help with that. For now, though, let's get you both settled. The apartment Joel had arranged was small but clean, 2 rooms above a bakery that made the whole building smell like fresh bread. It had real furniture, a stove that worked, windows that overlooked a busy street full of life and possibility. Alara stood in the middle of it and felt tears burning in her eyes. Hey, Rhett was beside her, his hand on her shoulder. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. It's just, this is real. We made it. We actually made it. He pulled her against his chest, careful of her wrist, and she felt him shaking slightly. Or maybe she was the one shaking. After everything they'd survived, standing in a small apartment in Sacramento felt more unreal than any of it. The bookkeeping position was at a textile manufacturer owned by a Chinese family named Wu. They were initially suspicious of Ilara. A white woman with a broken wrist and no references seemed like a poor investment. But she'd learned numbers helping Thomas with the ranch accounts, and Dr. Harrison had written her a letter of recommendation that emphasized her quick learning and steady hands. Mrs. Wu gave her a trial period of 2 weeks. Ilara made it count. She came early, stayed late, learned the specific way Mrs. Wu wanted the books kept, and proved she could manage accounts one-handed until her wrist healed enough for full use. By the end of the first week, Mrs. Wu stopped watching her like she might steal something. By the end of the second, she offered Ilara permanent employment. The pay wasn't much, but combined with what Rhett earned managing freight for Joel, it was enough. They could eat regularly, pay rent, even save a little. The normalcy of it was strange at first. Ilara kept expecting someone to recognize her, for Marcus's men to appear and drag her back. But weeks passed, then months, and nothing happened. Christmas came and went. Ilara's wrist healed enough to remove the cast, though Dr. Harrison's warning proved true. It would never quite work right again. She learned to compensate, to use her left hand more, to not mind the occasional ache that predicted rain. Rhett settled into his work with Joel with surprising ease. Turned out he was good at organizing chaos, at finding efficient routes, at dealing with difficult suppliers. Joel trusted him with more responsibility, and Rhett rose to meet it. The drifter persona fell away gradually, replaced by someone who showed up on time, kept his word, built a reputation. They got married in March, a quiet ceremony at the courthouse with Joel and his wife as witnesses. Ilara chose a new name for the occasion. Ilara Calder, leaving Voss behind forever. The clerk who processed the papers didn't question the discrepancy between the name on her identification and the name she gave. In California, people reinvented themselves constantly. She was just one more. That night, in their small apartment, Rhett gave her a wedding present, a small leather-bound journal and a pen. "I know you lost everything when we left Ashford Bend," he said. "Your home, your possessions, everything you built with Thomas. I can't give that back, but I thought maybe you'd want to start documenting this life, the one you're building now." Ilara opened the journal to the first page and found Rhett had already written something, an inscription in his careful handwriting. For Ilara, who chose freedom and built everything that followed, "May this life be entirely yours." She cried then, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition that she was happy. Despite everything, despite all they'd lost and survived, she was genuinely happy. "Thank you," she whispered. "For the journal? For all of it. For knocking on my door. For not giving up. For staying." He kissed her forehead. "Best decision I ever made." Spring turned to summer. Ilara's responsibilities at the textile business grew. Mrs. Wu, impressed by her work, began teaching her the business side of operations, purchasing, contracts, managing workers. When Mr. Wu's health began to fail, they made Ilara a junior partner, a decision that shocked everyone, including Ilara herself. "You've earned it," Mrs. Wu said simply. "You work hard, you're honest, and you understand numbers better than my own children. When we retire, we want someone we trust to continue what we built." Ilara thought about refusing, about the absurdity of a widow who'd fled Nevada in disgrace, now being offered a partnership in a successful business. But Mrs. Chen's words from Silver Creek echoed in her mind. "Men are usually the trouble. I outlived all of them, and good riddance." She accepted. By fall, she was managing most of the daily operations while the Wus gradually stepped back. She hired 2 more bookkeepers, expanded their client base, negotiated better prices with suppliers. The business grew, and her confidence grew with it. This was hers in a way the ranch had never been, built by her choices, her work, her vision. One evening in October, nearly 2 years after they'd fled Ashford Bend, Rhett came home with a newspaper and an expression Ilara couldn't read. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the paper, folded to the obituaries. She read the entry he was pointing to and felt her breath catch. Marcus Voss, age 42, died at his ranch in Ashford Bend, Nevada. Cause of death attributed to complications from pneumonia. survived by no immediate family, services pending. She read it twice to make sure she understood. Marcus was dead. The man who'd tried to force her into marriage, who'd sent hunters after her, who'd represented everything she'd fled from, he was gone. "How do you feel?" Rhett asked carefully. Alara waited for relief, for triumph, for satisfaction that the man who'd terrorized her was dead. But what she felt was something closer to emptiness. Marcus Voss had loomed so large in her fear, had driven so many of her choices, and now he was just a name in the obituaries, unmourned and already fading. "I feel like it doesn't matter," she said finally. "He's been dead to me for 2 years. This just makes it official." "Do you want to go back? Claim the ranch? It was yours and Thomas's before—" "No." The answer was immediate and certain. "That life is gone. I don't want it back." She looked around their small apartment at the life they'd built from nothing. "This is what I want, what we have here, what we're building." Rhett pulled her close, and she leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had once been so foreign to them both. The newspaper carried one other piece of information buried in the article. Marcus had died heavily in debt, his ranch seized by creditors, his assets sold at auction. Everything he'd fought to control, to claim, to own, dispersed to strangers for pennies on the dollar. Alara thought about the irony of it. She'd believed leaving meant losing everything. Instead, she'd gained what Marcus had lost: freedom, purpose, a future she controlled. His death changed nothing because he'd already been irrelevant to her life. She wrote in her journal that night, documenting the news, her reaction, and the strange sense of a chapter closing. Then she wrote about the future, plans to expand the textile business, ideas for new product lines, dreams of eventually owning the business outright. Years passed. The textile business thrived under Alara's management. When the Woos retired, they sold her their share for a price she could actually afford, paid off over time. Alara Calder became a known name in Sacramento business circles. The woman who'd built a small Chinese textile business into something that employed 50 people and supplied half the state. She never forgot where she'd come from. Hired women who'd fled bad situations, gave them work and dignity and a chance to rebuild. Supported charities that helped widows and abandoned wives. Paid forward the kindness that Mrs. Chen, Dr. Brennan, Dr. Harrison, and Sarah had shown her. Rhett's freight business with Joel expanded too. They opened offices in San Francisco and Portland, built a reputation for reliability and fair dealing. Rhett surprised himself by being good at business, at management, at building something that lasted. The wanted posters in those 3 territories gradually yellowed and were taken down, replaced by newer criminals. Nobody came looking for him. They never went back to Nevada, never contacted anyone from Ashford Bend. That life belonged to different people, a young widow trapped by circumstance and a drifter running from himself. Those people had died in the mountains or on a freight train or in the moment they chose to stay instead of keep running. On their 5th anniversary, Rhett gave Alara a deed. She opened it, confused, and found it was for a small ranch in the foothills east of Sacramento. Not huge, not extravagant, but theirs. "I know you loved ranching," he said. "Before everything happened. I thought maybe you'd want to try again, on your own terms this time." Alara looked at the deed, at this man who'd given her freedom and then given her the space to figure out what to do with it. "Our terms," she corrected. "We do this together." They built a house on that land, spending weekends and holidays there, while running their businesses in the city during the week, hired a manager to handle the day-to-day operations, and slowly built a small herd. It wasn't about profit. They had enough from the textile and freight businesses. It was about reclaiming something that had been taken from her, making it new, making it theirs. Sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, Alara would stand on the porch of their ranch house and look east toward Nevada. She'd think about the girl who'd climbed out a window in the dark, terrified and desperate. That girl had believed escape meant running forever, that freedom had to be fought for every single day. She'd been wrong. Freedom wasn't about running, it was about choosing to stay, about building something so solid, so completely yours, that no one could take it away. The ranch prospered, the businesses grew. Alara and Rhett built a life that was messy and imperfect and entirely theirs. They argued sometimes, struggled with decisions, made mistakes, but they did it together. Two people who'd learned that the opposite of being trapped wasn't running. It was choosing where you stood and refusing to be moved. 10 years after fleeing Ashford Bend, Elara received an unexpected letter. It was from a lawyer in Nevada, informing her that distant relatives of Thomas had contested the seizure of the ranch, won their case, and wanted to know if she had any interest in reclaiming her portion as his widow. She wrote back a single line: "I have no claim to that property and no interest in pursuing one. Please do not contact me again regarding this matter." Then she burned the letter and the lawyer's business card in the fireplace, watching the past turn to ash. That evening, she and Rhett sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the foothills gold and red. Their ranch spread out below them, small but thriving. In Sacramento, 50 people would show up for work tomorrow at a textile business she'd built from almost nothing. In her journal, she'd written about expansion plans, new opportunities, dreams still taking shape. "Do you ever regret it?" Rhett asked. "Everything you left behind?" Elara thought about it honestly. "I regret that Thomas died, that I lost those years, that happiness, but leaving Ashford Bend, choosing to run? No, never. Even with everything we went through? Especially because of everything we went through." She took his hand. "I was property there. Someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's intended possession. Here, I'm just Elara, and that's enough." Rhett squeezed her hand, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Somewhere in Nevada, the ranch that had once been her whole world was being claimed by people she'd never met. Let them have it. She'd built something better. The greatest victory, Elara had learned, wasn't taking back what had been stolen. It was building something so much better than what you'd lost that you stopped caring about the theft. She'd climbed out a window with nothing and built an empire. Not of land or cattle or money, though she had those too, but of choices, of freedom, of a life entirely her own. Marcus Voss had died alone in the house that should have been a prison, surrounded by debts and failure. She'd lived to build businesses, to help others escape their own cages, to love someone who'd chosen to stay instead of drift. In the end, that was the real victory. Not revenge or reclamation, but the simple fact that she'd survived and thrived and become someone that the scared girl in Ashford Bend wouldn't recognize. As darkness fell over the ranch, Elara stood and headed inside. Tomorrow she had a business to run, workers to pay, lives to change. The past was ash and memory. The future was wide open and entirely hers to write. She'd chosen freedom once, in the dark before a forced wedding. Every day since, she chose it again. And that choice, repeated, renewed, reaffirmed, made all the difference.